Good morning, everyone. My name is James Reddish, and I have the honor of being the Executive Vice President here at the Little Rock Regional Chamber of Commerce. We're so excited that you're joining us this morning for our first Equip Business Success Series of 2021. It's a topic that from the registrations we know is very important to you all as members, and we're thrilled to have Amber with us here today to be able to deliver this amazing content. From a chamber standpoint, we want to make sure that you all know that this is just the first in what we hope will be an evolving conversation with you, our members, and with the community at large. This topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is too important to be refined to just one meeting or one event like this. In fact, we actually have an event coming up that had to be rescheduled because of the snow. It'll be coming up in March 10th. We'll have more detail for you at the end. We hope many of you will be able to join us for that event as well. But for today, we're thrilled to have Amber Mccoy with us today from the diversity booth, as well as in her capacity at UAMS, talking to us about how to build a DEI movement. So much of this begins with our personal story and personal reflection of us as individuals and you all as business leaders. Today's conversation, again, I think we'll start to peel back some of those layers and help those who may just be beginning their conversation know what first steps to take, as well as maybe those who are further along in the journey, reevaluate their plan, think about their metrics, and think about how to make their DEI work even deeper and even more impactful. I would be remiss if I didn't thank our presenting sponsor. Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield has been a partner with us in our Equip Small Business Success Series for many, many years now, and we're really thrilled. During this pandemic time, Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield has been helping small businesses across our region and indeed across the state. So we are so thankful to Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield for their support of the Equip Small Business Success Series and their continued support of the Chamber and our small businesses here in the region. So now let's get down to business. We want to make sure that we leave lots of time for questions at the end. So go ahead and start typing those questions in right now. We're here at the Chamber. There's no studio audience here, but the staff here at the Chamber will be taking your questions and we'll be asking them to Amber at the end in real time. So if you've got questions, or if you've got topics that you want her to cover in more detail as we get towards the end, go ahead and enter those into the question area, and we'll make sure to keep those. So I'm going to have her introduce herself and give you a little bit more of her background, but we are so thrilled today to be joined by Ms. Amber. Come on up.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Clicker.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Amber Mccoy, and I am your favorite diversity specialist. But that's also because no one ever knows the second one, so it's really easy for me to be the favorite. I am the CEO of the Diversity Booth. I am the Chief Strategist at 1838. I am the Manager of Intercultural Education at UAMS. So all of that to say, I just love DEI, and I will do it in my personal and professional life. I also sit on the city's Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission, because again, in the event that there is anything DEI, I am all about it. And other than that, then I spend time with these boys up here. This is Jaden and Corday. I have one entering high school this year and one exiting high school, so I'll teach you about DEI if you have tips and tools on how to stay sane with all of that going on. We hear a lot of DEI, and it always sounds like a buzzword. First of all, diversity is much bigger than just Black and gay, because that is typically what people boil the word diversity down to. Diversity simply deals with representation. That's what it is. Typically of our physical dimensions, but not just our physical dimensions, our communication styles. If you are a Myers-Briggs lover like I am, whether you're an ENTJ, an ISTJ, your geographic location, your birth order, whether you're a big sister, the eldest child, all of those dimensions make us the multidimensional beings that we are. So when you hear diversity, it is strictly speaking to representation. Is there representation here? Equity Equity is when we have structural environments that ensure equality and access to information and resources, right? Equity is not equality. Equality is where we give everyone the same. Equity is where we give what is needed to whom it is needed specifically, right? This is where we're targeting, not tokenism. I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is where if you're looking for a type of diversity or a dimension of diversity, making sure that you are placing that ad in different places specific to where you're wanting to find that dimension of diversity. And inclusion speaks to culture. Inclusion is a feeling, right? So the easiest way to remember this, take the diversity book way. Diversity, that is when you're making a playlist, right? You're making a playlist and you want to have the greatest playlist ever. Equity is making sure that everyone has access to the playlist, that everyone was able to add their favorite song to the playlist, and then inclusion. Inclusion is that feeling that you get when Bohemian Rhapsody comes on and your friends are around. That is inclusion. It speaks to culture and climate, all of which are important when you're talking about organizations. Why? Because diversity and inclusion, not only is it just the right thing to do, it's profitable. It's profitable. Diversity makes money. Why? Well, if everyone in my office is like me, one, they talk entirely too much. But two, if I'm stuck on a problem, they're stuck on a problem, right? So having multiple voices at the table, multiple lived experiences, backgrounds, education, varied life experiences is how we get new solutions, new ideas, we engage in greater analytical thinking, all of this, all comes from DEI. Now, diverse companies, right, have 2 to 3 times higher cash flow. Just why? Well, being diverse is one thing, right? So yes, if you have different ideas and different backgrounds at the table, like this one says, racially and ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to perform better. Because we talk, we share. And if you're in an environment where you feel comfortable enough to share your multidimensional self, well, then that's where the ideas happen. I have a colleague at UAMS, and we are both left-handed. We are both Geminis. We're both extremely extroverted. And a conversation between Nick and I can start out about number 2 pencils and end 2 hours later with the multiverse and talking about gap theory, right? But ideas come from this conversation because he's able to be who he is, I'm able to be who I am, and making sure that we make room for those in our companies is how we have sustainable workforces. Employees don't leave jobs, they leave managers. Now, diversity is one thing, but diversity by itself is not helpful. If you have diverse population, but they don't feel heard, they don't feel included, which is where that equity and inclusivity comes from, then you're still not doing your business any justice. Inclusive companies are more innovative, like we said, being able to bring your multidimensional self. When I think about inclusion, I think about hot Cheetos. You have, I have 2 sons. They eat hot Cheetos like crazy. Well, hot Cheetos came from a guy who worked at Frito-Lay in the 70s. His name was Richard. And one day, he's a Mexican-American immigrant who was working as a custodian at Frito-Lay. One day, the cheesy machine was broken. So I don't know what Cheetos without cheesy stuff look like, but Richard decided he should take these home. So he took these cheeseless Cheetos home and he put hot stuff all over them. And his family loved them. Said that it reminded him of a snack that they had in Mexico called elote, right? Now, his wife said, you got to tell somebody about this snack. She said it over and over and over again, like wives do. And eventually, he picks up the phone, and what else is he to do as a custodian other than to call the CEO of the company? Calls the CEO, and the CEO does admit that he said that he thought maybe he was a plant manager when he called. Either way, they let Richard come pitch his idea, and Hot Cheetos, became one of their best selling products. When we don't get caught up in hierarchies, positionality, organizational structures, and everyone is working towards the same goal, you don't have to worry about employee engagement if I'm engaged in my team. You don't have to worry about whether we're going to be profitable, whether we're going to move the needle, or even getting buy-in. You're going to be, as a leader, tired because they're gonna always have new ideas. Higher representation of women in C-suite level positions, 34% greater returns for shareholders. Even if you look at the pandemic and how the countries that are led by women handled the pandemic, they are better off financially. Women do take risks, believe it or not, but making sure that we're not putting gender in a box, right? Making sure that we say neutral terms, such as partner, spouse, mate, when we're going to have parties. These are little things that we can do to build inclusivity. So first things first, let's say you are ready to start your DEI journey. This is one of my favorite quotes. I have lots of quotes because I feel like I don't have to be profound. I can just quote people who are. That's kind of how it's my thing. This is from my favorite movie, Remember the Titans. And this is after football practice, and the lead character says to the other, "Attitude reflects leadership, Captain." This is necessary for every leader to understand. What you address, what you hold people accountable for, what you ignore, this shapes and sets the culture even without you being cognizant of it. For instance, if your boss doesn't really care whether you're there at 8 o'clock, but cares whether you answer emails, well, then you're gonna be like me. You might get there at 9:30 in the morning, but you're gonna answer emails all the time. You will be available. Attitude reflects leadership. Internal customer service, of course, that is how we move the needle and get all of our companies to a better place of equity. Now, as a leader, you're going to start this journey. I encourage you to start it on your own, learning about your own biases. Before you even bring in a consultant, before they use lots of fancy DEI words, before they tell you all of these amazing plans and workshops that they have, as a leader, there are a couple of things you have to decide. In a world being turned around or upside down by a pandemic, all of the civil unrest of 2020 and the insurrection in 2021, these are things as a leader you have to be ready to address, to reckon with, as my partner Don Wood would say, and be culturally responsive. A lot of times, leaders will say nothing out of fear of saying the wrong thing. And your silence speaks volumes. I absolutely love my Chancellor at UAS. Dr. Cam Patterson is one of the most culturally responsive leaders for whom I've ever worked in my entire career, next to Curtis Barnett. Now, when the Breonna Taylor, verdict came down, the next day, Cam had a whole town hall. And he said, "I am a white male. I do not understand what my Black employees are experiencing, but I know that they're hurt." That was enough for me. I felt seen. Right? As a leader, there are certain things that you have to decide through cultural humility and cultural responsiveness. Culture of humility is where we're simply going to allow each and every person to be the owner of their own experience. We're going to acknowledge that only they are an expert in their experience. It also means that we're going to continually self-assess and that it is a commitment to lifelong learning, which means that we're going to get it wrong sometimes. As leaders, you're going to get it wrong sometimes, but that's where the authenticity is. Empowering your team to tell you when you get it wrong. Putting steps in place that allow for communication, even things that seem simple, like the ouch roll. The ouch roll is something that my mother gifted my sister and I with a very, very long time ago. Someone says something and it impacts you. It doesn't mean that that was their intent, but if it impacts you, you say, ouch. And I'm dramatic, so I do like a move and everything, right? Either way, it gives you and the other person the opportunity to address what has happened. Doesn't make anyone right, doesn't make anyone wrong. But what happens in cultures, especially in workspaces, when you don't address things, you're just carrying it around all day. And then the next time they say something that impacts you and you don't address it, then you're putting that in that bag and you're carrying it around all day. You don't have time to be engaged. You don't have time to think of new ideas. You don't have time to be your multidimensional self because you're busy licking wounds that you could have addressed. But leaders have to be the ones to start those conversations, have to be the ones ready to hold themselves accountable and their teams accountable. Now, when you get ready to bring in a diversity consultant, one, shop around the way you would do anything else, because every single diversity firm is different. There are as many methods and frameworks and assessments and ideas. I mean, they're as vast as the field of diversity is vast, right? So find the company that speaks to you in a certain way. For instance, the diversity booth, we are storytellers. We will help you create change through telling stories, through the lived experiences of your employees, right? Through the lived experience of even learning about your organization. Maybe you have employees that really don't know why the logo is such. They have no idea how this company was started. All they know is that they get paid on Fridays and they're okay with it. But if you want them to engage differently, that's where the stories are. We have been telling stories since ancient times. We're still trying to figure out what these hieroglyphics mean. We still want to know all about the writings and the drawings on my caves. That's storytelling, and nothing has changed about that. So whether you are making space for diverse populations or identities such as your LGBTQ+ population, whether you're making space for your Black, Indigenous, your other people of color, whether you are simply trying to make sure that everyone feels welcome, like, again, that playlist, well, it's going to be highlighting and celebrating the differences. Very often you hear people talk about how we're all the same and we all bleed and we all that, but it's okay. It is okay to be different. It's okay to celebrate those differences. It's okay to honor the lived experiences because they're different. Now, when I say great minds don't think alike and you're bringing in a consultant, they know the field of DEI, right? There are best practices and tips and tools that most of the consultants are going to use, but you know your team best. You are the expert in your team. So prior to that DEI expert getting there, make a list of things that you think you would like to happen. Maybe you want your team to be more engaged. Maybe you want them to want to go to potlucks on Fridays. Make a wish list. If you could have an inclusion genie and they just came in and boop, they were dressed just like Will Smith in the new Aladdin, and they can make all of these things happen, what would that look like? What would that look like? Right? Be excited about the fact that they are going to push you in ways that maybe you haven't thought of before. Very often, leaders think about diversity work as like this disparate idea, something that they will do after they get these things slowed down, after they put out these fires, after they finish hiring, after they restaff. But diversity, equity, and inclusion is the lens that you need to do all of those things. It's the framework that you use. If you're writing a new policy, making sure that it's not going to adversely affect certain populations, you use your DEI lens. That's what that consultant is for. If you are wanting to engage your team differently, for me, I do my best work at 2 a.m., right? It's also because no one can email me back at that time. So that is when I like to work. My boss cares about work output, not the time in which it happens. Engage people where they are. That does look different. Your millennials may want to sit in a different place every single time they come in the office. If you don't care, then what difference does it make? A lot of times we get caught up in, we've always done it this way. But just like we're in a whole world, I like to call this place New Earth. We've never been here before. It's all New Earth. There are weird mass things and, global pandemics, all types of stuff. But as you are shaping your culture, as you are getting to this new place, your team is going to go through this norming, storming, forming phase. And your consultant is there to assist you and guide you through all of that. Now, like I said, you know your team best, but you need to be able to trust your consultant. This is something that is very, very important. Your consultant you need to know or trust that one, that they've done this work before, that they have experience not only in this work, but that they can share with you examples of where they did this work. So about 3 years ago, I was doing one of my very first pitches to an organization. And I was still at UAMS at the time, and I was doing work in the field of DEI. And I just knew that I was ready. I knew that I was ready for this pitch, and I bombed it horribly. It went bad. Oh, it went bad. But it was because even though in my head I had all the pieces together, I wasn't able to articulate it. Your diversity consultant needs to be able to articulate the plan, because they are, if you will, a cultural diplomat for you. They're the ones that are going to guide you into this new and better tomorrow. And so they need to know where they're going. You can't have the blind leading the blind. Right? You've made your wish list. They're supposed to be your genie. Right? So they're going to push you. Great minds don't think alike, and allow yourself to start doing that work prior to them getting there. As a leader, you need to know your biases. There are several assessments like the Harvard Implicit Association test. Start thinking about your personal ideas of gender, how your background or your upbringing, all of this plays a part in the multidimensional beings that we are. And as leaders, you are the most important person in shaping that culture. Your resources will align with your priorities. Now, everybody is not able to spend millions of dollars on diversity consulting. But there are things that every single organization can do, no matter the budget. And that's checking in with your current employees. Taking an assessment, there are lots of cultural assessments, and many of which are free. Even if you have the assessment done prior to the consultant, and then you still have data to give them when they get there. They're still going to do their own research. They're still going to talk with your team, but your resources will align with your priorities. If you're saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, but you're not willing to put money behind it, then you're saying it's not really important. If you're saying diversity, equity, and inclusion is important and you want everyone to know about implicit bias because those micro inequities and those microaggressions are shaping your culture, you are hurting your colleagues, but you're not requiring the learning experiences. And many times you're just going to be preaching to the choir, people who are already interested in the subject, people who don't know that selfishly, the more room we make for other people, the more we make for ourselves. So diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't just about bringing in other populations or identities. Very often we have this horrible idea that inclusion is like pie and that more for somebody means less for somebody else. And that's not how inclusion works. Inclusion is more like water. It's the strongest force on earth. And the more we have, the stronger we are. I like to think of the work that we do in DEI as taking up space. I personally want to come into a place and take up so much space that 3 people can sit down next to me. And then they can take up so much space that 3 people can sit down next to them. So if you imagine this imaginary table, we're scooting and we're scooting and we're scooting, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it allows everyone to come in. Everyone. If you're saying your resources align with your priorities, and you're willing to put money behind positions, then you also need to put authority behind those same positions. Your HR person is not your DEI person. Those are 2 different fields, 2 very, very different fields. Neither is the random Black woman that you happen to know her name. She is also not your DEI consultant, because being a member of a marginalized population does not make one a specialist. It's not how it works. It feels like anything else. It's great if you want to start with maybe DEI committees, but all of the resources, whether it is time, money, whether it is you telling your team that you're going to protect the time that they spend working on DEI, it will let them know how you as a leader have prioritized it. Personally, I don't work with companies if I can't meet with their leadership first. A lot of times you'll have a CEO or top level executive who like push the button on something, and then there's some HR person that reach out and they say, can you come do this? There is no amount of workshops ever that is going to train or change your company's culture. One implicit bias workshop is not going to make everyone in your office suddenly understand how their implicit biases work, and that they're going to no longer commit microaggressions. There's no magic bullet. DEI takes work. It takes commitment, and creating a culture takes lots and lots of thought. That is all your DEI consultant is. They're a thought partner for you, and they are a thought leader in the field, which is why you have to be able to trust where they are going to be guiding you. But just like if you were building a new house, right? And you want this type of sink and you want this, they should be able to incorporate those things for you. And at the very least, tell you why they cannot if they don't think your team is ready, right? Because everything is based on team readiness. Being intentionally inclusive. It sounds simple, but intentional inclusivity for me is a lifestyle. It means checking in differently. These are things leaders can do now, every day, every meeting. Before you start your meeting, you say, hey, you know what? If you had to describe your week using a color for a weather event, what would it be? At best, you get to laugh at lots of colors and weather events. At worst, you get to see that maybe your team is struggling with some things, and this meeting could be an email. That is what culturally responsive leadership looks like. Checking in with individuals, and it takes time. That's the frustrating part. No one wants to take the time, but it takes time to build culture, and it takes time to sustain and fortify it. Now, when you bring your consultant, if they have a team, look at how their team communicates. For me and our team, it's about integrity. not going to ask a company to do something that I would not do with or for my own team, or that I have not done with or for my own team. So before you get all, let's say you're in love and they are just this smooth talking DEI person, check out their behaviors. Check out how are they going to help you achieve this? If the first very large portion of their plan doesn't include just listening, just weeks and months of listening, I wouldn't trust them. If you're going to create a new strategic plan, craft a new tomorrow, all of that, you're going to want buy-in. And people do not want to go, oh, we have a new plan, and not see themselves in it. So that is what your DEI consultant is supposed to do. Make the people in your organization feel as though they have each been able to play a part in the new plan that leadership is crafting. They're done through listening sessions, cultural assessments. They can be done through town halls. However, you can do survey links. The point is, listening is key. And don't feel the need to craft a whole plan very quickly. It's okay for you to simply say in the first half of your plan that you're planning. That's okay. You can plan in your plan. The strategies and tools that your DEI consultant is going to use, they need to be specific. Like I said, there are best practices just for what intentionally inclusivity looks like or inclusive excellence, but it's different. The way that I would engage the tech company that I'm currently working with is vastly different than the way that I'm going to engage the STEM school down the street. Intentional inclusivity is moving from asking who's at the table to asking who's not at the table that should be at the table, and did they get detailed instructions to the location of the table, and upon arrival, a microphone and a chair. So how do you know if the plan is working? It's the story. What you are looking for is not necessarily a miracle worker. You're looking for a miracle seer. Your diversity consultant needs to be able to see intangible things like engagement and smiles and attendance at events, and be able to correlate that into what is best and profitable for your company, as well as how it's going to make the culture better. And are they telling that story correctly? Check up on them. They're going to give you references, but many DEI professionals have websites and they'll have previous clients on their website, right? Now, when you ask for a list of references, they're not going to give you all of those. So check out the ones they give you and then randomly pick 2 off of their page and call them. Ask how that experience was. Do they have multiple ways? It should be a multi-pronged plan. And in private sector, there are ways for you to incentivize DEI initiatives. If maybe your goal is to increase the diversity of your workforce, well, empower your managers to recruit differently and then incentivize that. Like, oh, you know what? If you have this many diversity hires, you get 10% added to your budget. Can't do that very much in public sector, but you can most certainly do those things in private. If your DEI consultant is only going to do workshops, I would just say DEI consultant. Again, there is no amount of workshops that's going to sustain a culture. You need to know that they can look at policies. You need to know that they know how to make sure a policy is actionable. You need to know that they've done this before. You need to discuss the deliverables and things that you want at the beginning, right? Because if not, you're new to this space. And so you're not gonna know upfront to ask for all of these things. Whether you need a report quarterly, and as far as the length of a contract, that varies by company and of course by size, but the same way you would if you were buying a house, you have a price point, know what that is for you and for your company. And then you tell the diversity consultant, this is what we would like. They're going to draft up a proposal for you, and it can even look like a grocery list, right? Where they're going to say, you know what, if this is the budget that you have, we can do this, or a combination of this. And don't be afraid to make small steps now and then come back in a year and say, you know what, I want to work with this consultant again, and maybe we can look at redoing that strategic plan. The most important thing is to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the lens. This is where the money is. This is where a better tomorrow is, honestly. And all of those things that we haven't figured out. Whether we're going to cure cancer or not, it's going to happen with DEI. Whether we're going to actually be able to inhabit Mars, it's going to happen, right? With DEI. Using that as our lens, our framework, and our guiding lights, that's how we change tomorrow, period. I am happy to answer lots of questions. One, because share all the tips and tools and knowledge that I have. Because I love what I do. And it still amazes me people pay me to do it. I mean, I'm going to continue to allow them to pay me to do it, but I absolutely love it.
All right, well, so I'll maybe come up here, Amber, if that's okay with you, and you know, I've got a bunch of questions, and I know we've got some coming in. So if you've got questions, go ahead and enter them in. But I'm just gonna maybe start to stick down some things that you mentioned that I'd like you to go maybe a little bit deeper on. So when we talk about DEI, you referenced sort of policies and you referenced culture. Talk a little bit about that balance. Is there an order? How does one reinforce the other?
So it is like fighting a war on many fronts.
Yeah.
Right? Hopefully you have a team focused on your DEI initiatives. So even if you bring a consultant in, you're going to need a committee in-house that kind of guides and watches those things. Now, culture, you shape that through what is expected, right? Leaders and what they are saying they're going to hold people accountable. For instance, I really don't ever advocate for like this zero tolerance type of rules, right? What I do advocate for is acceptance and accountability. Someone got something wrong, because we're going to get it wrong. Even diversity specialists get it wrong sometimes. Now, you do fortify that with policies. Hey, you got it wrong this time, and then we let it, you know, we called you in, not calling out. We called you in, we allowed, you know, maybe the diversity specialist or so and so to educate you, but now you've done it again. And that's when it's time to hold someone accountable. But leaders have to be consistent in that, because holding this person accountable but not this person does not help set the culture.
Well, it seems like probably policies the quicker and easier thing to change, but it's that culture, right?
It is, because culture is going to shift and change. I mean, think about it. The word selfie is now in the dictionary. But 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been, right? So culture changes constantly. But policy are things that you can review quarterly and even annually to make sure that they're not adversely affecting your population. Maybe when you first wrote this policy that said that everybody needs to be here from 8 to 5, you know, in this desk, or they need to clock in. But if you're not getting the best out of that employee, because really they would thrive from 9 to 6, then what is that 8 to 5 really doing, right? So being willing to shake things up and do things differently and reevaluate policies and sometimes throwing them out.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm hearing from you, is both on the culture and the policy standpoint. It's not just all net new, right? It's a lot of, let's look back at what exists.
Most certainly, because that's what's impacting your team right now.
Yep.
Yes.
That's starting point. So let's assume no work is going on in a company, right? but the leader is maybe tuned in today, or maybe just in general has decided that this is some work they want to do. What's the first step, right? I mean, because it can be a little bit daunting. All of this is overwhelming. You see lots of these companies now who are doing it really well. What's the first step?
Ask your employees. Your employees know when they feel seen. I got shared that, when Dr. Patterson had the town hall, I felt seen. That was very important to me. That's something that I care about. So if you are doing, you don't want to do checkbox diversity things, but heritage days or heritage months, whether it's Black history, Asian Pacific Islander, women's history, like these are things that you can do that promote diversity and celebrate your team internally. Ask them, are there holidays, right? Are there holidays that maybe you would like to see celebrated? There are several cultural assessments that you can take that are online to kind of see where your team is. And then, like I said, keeping that information for if you do bring a consultant in, like so you have things to give them. But the everyday things, check in. Just check in. Ask your team how they are. Ask them if they have, do you have the bandwidth to take this meeting? We're in a culture where we Zoom or Hangouts or Teams or there's something, and we tend to overbook ourselves because we don't have to run to meetings anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of those meetings can also be emails. So checking to see which meetings can be emails, but then checking in before every meeting. Just make it a standard practice, and you can find fun ways to do that. If you had to describe your day using a type of heavy metal song, like there are lots of fun ways to check in that allow your team to kind of get to know each other better, but it also kind of allows you to decompress before you start talking about whatever it is you're going to talk about.
So we got this question in the chat. It was a smaller company who was trying to figure out how do they recruit a more diverse team, right? So talking about how to make those opportunities available, maybe in areas that work your population. Talk about that signaling, right? How does a company signal this when they're trying to recruit?
So it is the difference between what's called tokenism and targeting. Okay, tokenism is when you're saying, I want this dimension of diversity, and it just anyone will do. You're like, you know what? That person fits that diversity and they can now have this position. Targeting is where you're going to be specific. If you are, let's say you're wanting your Black, Indigenous, or even other people of color, are you marketing it at the HBCUs, right? Do you have pipeline programs? Very often people will have internships, but the individuals will not experience a warm climate, and then they don't come back after the internship. If none of your interns are returning, that's a sign, right? That culture needs to be changed. So the things that you can do is being specific. Network, your network is your network, right? I'm a mom. I can probably list about 50 other moms, right? I'm a Black woman. I'm pretty sure I could list about 200 other Black women. Ask them. Be honest and transparent about what you are looking for. It's okay. That is what equity looks like. It's going to look like preferential treatment. It's going to look like all types of special programs. That's okay. We did not get the disparities that we have in healthcare, education, generational wealth, criminal justice by giving equally, and we're not going to fix them by giving equally. Equity is how we'll do that.
So this is we've obviously come out of a year in many ways that was unlike any year that certainly anyone alive has ever seen. But how do you see DEI, which has sort of become in vogue a little bit? It's good to, that's a good thing, right? But how do you sustain that? What does beyond 2020 look like? What does beyond the moment look like? You talk about creating the movement.
So we are, like I said, we are in a very unique time. Right now, we have the opportunity to remake everything. For years, we said that our educational system was antiquated and we needed to find, and now we have virtual learning. Well, DEI, when you're looking at that virtual learning, says Where are we being equitable? We have students in LRSD that don't have internet in the home, so virtual learning is an issue. So it's one, realizing that all forms of oppression are connected, every last one of them. And even to quote Dr. King, that we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, and whatsoever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. DEI can seem like a buzzword now, but those same students that you are not paying attention to that don't have access to the internet are the ones that are going to be caring for you in the next 20 years. So you might want to make sure that they have access to learning materials. It is for the betterment for everyone that we make space, and inclusion and equity is how we do that.
I stepped away. Stacey, do you have questions in the Q&A?
We do. We have a really good one actually that kind of follows up. How would you handle a situation when you're a part of an organization who refuses to address diversity?
So the question was, how do you handle if you're an individual for whom this is important to, but your organization has not bought in? What do you do as an individual in the company?
Every single individual has the opportunity to create change. Every single one. I mean, it's kind of like how a smile can be contagious. So diversity is natural. A company can't not address diversity. A lot of times people will see maybe a group of people who all identify the same racially and think that there's no diversity there. That's not true. When you think about lived experiences, when you think about background, when you think about culture, birth order, geographic location, all of that. So one, I like to remind people, don't get caught up in just the physical dimensions of diversity. There is diversity everywhere, even in groups that look similar. Two, when you say they won't address it, like you mean in their hiring practices, in their recruitment, like what are you saying as far as they are not willing to address it? Are they not willing to make a statement? Because those are things that in a very non-union type way, employees that care about these things, they can push the needle. You have the power, right? There's one leader or one CEO, but there's an entire employee workforce. What you need is a champion. Sometimes it is just finding that champion, that co-conspirator, that ally that actually can have the voice of the leader, right? And they may come begrudgingly along, but even if it starts the process, that's fine. But you have the opportunity. Just pair up with other employees that are passionate about the same thing. You're not going to take where you belong.
So let me ask it the opposite way. How do you deal with holdouts? How do you deal with, be it at leadership or within the company? I mean, everybody's part of the culture. How do you deal with holdouts?
Well, I focus on the movable middle. And that is where you have to concentrate your time. There will always be outliers, and those people are not going to move most likely. But there are individuals that are often on the fence. For instance, last year, when there were all the civil unrest and the riots and such, right? It's the Black Lives Matter. And when I say Black Lives Matter, I don't think about the organization, I think about my sons, right? Well, we also know that all lives matter came up in context, right? In relation to, I have never to this day had a conversation with someone who was saying all lives matter, who didn't understand it differently after we had a conversation, right? The movable middle is where you focus. It's being able to not just rationalize, but humanize things. It is the very simple thing of honoring and affirming the lived experiences. And you can do that by simply listening and having facilitated conversations with DEI professionals, and you're not going to find many holdouts after that.
Yeah, you said something to me that I'd like you to share with everybody, the difference between a window and a mirror.
Windows and Mirrors is came from the SEED project, stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. And a window is if someone is sharing a story, or even you're watching television and you cannot see yourself represented, you can't identify, you don't have context for that, they provided a window into their life. If someone is sharing a story and you can see yourself reflected, and you can identify, that is a mirror for you. So being cognizant, especially as a leader, about the windows and mirrors that you see on a daily basis. There's a reflection that we do in several of our workshops, and we just ask participants to close their eyes. And we ask a series of questions, things like, did you have to wonder if this presentation would be given in a language that you understand? Did you have to wake children up this morning? Did you have to get dressed in the dark, right? Did you have to wonder if there would be a lactation station available for you? Just this series of questions very often, because it is human nature to sometimes be selfish. We'll have an employee or a colleague, and maybe they have a frown, and we selfishly and arrogantly think it's about us. And we have no idea what it took for them to even put their feet on the floor and make it into that building. Culture humility is where we pause. It allows that person to be the owner of their own experience. We can honor those windows and mirrors and then grow from them. Emotional learning is where the growth happens.
Sandy, I got a couple more, but just want to check in any questions in the filter.
We actually have one that's kind of more personal for Amber, that she just really wants to know when and why you decided to launch your own company.
Well, I wanted to be able to do something my way. I love being able to think out of the box, and I love being able to craft solutions that are unique and different, and even figuring out how we're going to honor those stories. I also wanted to be able to empower individuals who look like me, who may not often get those opportunities, right? So when we talk about race or racial barriers, oppression and such, I encourage people to listen to the Black woman. Why? It's because if you look at pay scale, it is white man, Black man, white woman, Black woman. Okay? If you look at healthcare, Black women are dying at a rate of 4 to 1 to their white counterparts from maternal-related complications. You look at cancer treatments, all of these things where individuals who look like me and identify like me are being impacted. I wanted a company that was going to amplify those voices, and in being able to amplify those voices, honor the lived experiences of others while we create social change and do it the way I felt it could be done. So.
I love it.
And I also really like that my mom came up with the name. I am all about tongue in cheek and like cheesy stuff. So the diversity booth, come on, you can't not like.
I love it. I love it. Got a couple more questions. So as you think then about, you shared some great stats about it's not just a buzzword, but it's buzzing profit, I think is what you like to say. How do you think about metrics? How do you think about, I mean, again, there's probably some policy and culture, but how do you think about metrics and assign causalities to them?
So it's going to be different based on what metric or what you're trying to measure. Let's say you're looking at, you want to make more diverse hires, okay? Well, look at the population that you're trying to serve. And oftentimes people will want to parity the population, right? If in Arkansas, what, Blacks make up 27 and something like that, and then, right, okay. So you're saying this is what I want, my workforce to look like, but then you have to look at the available workforce. So you can't always do direct correlation to things like that. So that's where your specialist comes in, being able to break down your data and tell you what is achievable or could be achievable, right? When you're talking about measuring culture, benchmark assessments, you give one at the beginning, you enact all of these amazing DEI initiatives, heritage months, to being able to have facilitated conversations around very tough subjects, and you don't shy away from them, and then you give another assessment a year later to see if the needle moves. But then figure out what you're wanting to track, right? But I still say qualitative data is the best.
Yeah.
Right? About maybe 2 years ago, I had done a workshop at an organization, and a friend of mine called and said, "Did you by chance do a workshop over here the other day?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" She was like, "You know what? My coworker came up to me out the blue and apologized for all of these micro inequities and microaggressions that they did not realize they were committing," right? Now, that is not something that is going to be marked on some chart, but that makes a difference, right? The person who had been receiving those microaggressions and micro inequities, they're like paper cuts. You're not gonna die from a paper cut, but 1,000 paper cuts a day is no way to live.
Right.
So she now gets to kind of bandage those up, right? She's not going to receive those anymore. Culture and feeling, that feeling of inclusivity, that's what's most important.
So you have the opportunity to see lots of different companies, as well as from UAMS's standpoint. Can you share just a little, you talked a little bit about UAMS, can you share a couple of the things that you've seen Dr. Patterson put in place and that you've seen other leaders within the organization, maybe just recently, start to take this journey?
So we just launched an initiative that all members of Team UMS will be trained on implicit bias awareness. Side note, let's not say implicit bias training. You can't train the implicit bias, but you can become aware. Now, that makes a huge difference. Even if you just think about the symphony years ago, they started doing blind auditions, and then the next year, right, they had 50% gender diversity, right? Because we have these ideas on what we think certain identities and populations and right should look like. So implicit bias is really big, but it has to be followed up. Like you can't just do it one time. So I do love that even though we are launching an implicit bias awareness initiative, it has to be followed up every year. Like continual learning. That's what the cultural humility part is. I have seen, well, one, the town halls where you have these tough conversations and they're not shying away. That assists in creating culture. Dr. Giddens is our Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I absolutely love our Chief of Police at UMS. And as you can imagine, during the civil unrest, people were not the nicest to our police. Well, because what we do is advocate in the firm, we had a town hall where we allowed our chief to share what they do. Humanizing people makes a huge difference, right? So again, having tough conversations and then making those things required, right? Making those workshops and training required. They may sit in there begrudgingly, but it's soaked in somewhere, right? It makes a difference. And the thing is, I can hold you accountable for it afterwards. Right? Those holdouts that you're talking about, they're not going to want to hold out for long because, as we said, inclusion allows for you to see more engagement, more analytical thinking. It is all of these things. Diversity begets diversity begets diversity, right? Nobody wants to sit by themselves. We know that because that's why, we all had tables at lunch with specific groups.
Well, it also seems like, and I mean, you can just tell from the way that you sort of present this, creating a more diverse and inclusive and equitable culture, you've got to be inclusive then as people come into it, right? And so it's not necessarily about you got to honor the past. It's that duality of honoring the past, but also being able to allow people to be a new person today. Right?
It's getting rid of cancel culture, right? I was working with an organization, and two, I will say, not being reactionary as a leader. Very, very often, diversity consultants are called in after something has occurred, after something has gone wrong, and then you bring us in and you say, "Can you fix it?" And we go, "No, you broke this a long time. Like this was broken way before this incident, right?" So understand that your diversity consultant is coming in to assist you and guide you with these things, but you're going to have to take responsibility. So as a leader, take responsibility for your past, right? If you know that your organization has a history of, maybe donating to causes that were not affirming to certain populations or identities, it's okay to share that. It's okay to be transparent. I think very often we have this idea that leadership is stoic and that they do not tell when they're wrong or they don't tell when they mess up. But the data shows that employees being able to connect with their leader in a very different way, and being able to see them as human, gives them buy-in and gives the leader even more power, right? Or if you will, as far as influence, we'll say, not necessarily power.
Other questions?
So you talked about what companies should look for in a consultant. As a consultant, what do you look for in a company?
We're all dating. If this is a date, think of it like a date where you share credit scores on the first date, right? Like, you're going to come in, and I know the tools and tips and skills that I have, but I need to find out what you want, right? And even though I want to be as authentic and transparent as possible, I need to know that you're going to do that as well, because they have the right to not, right, work with your organization. Like I said, I won't work with an organization if I can't meet with their leadership first, right? So there are just certain things that maybe that DEI consultant has in place. And if you're not willing to meet those, then that just may not be the partnership for you. That same DEI consultant that remember I told you about the several years ago, the one that I bombed, right? Now, in my head, I had this plan, right? And so if you are one of those leaders and you're like, I'm gonna take a risk. I'm gonna take a risk on this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, I know that they'll figure it out. Okay, if you have the opportunity to kind of take that journey with them, but you still gotta know where you're wanting to end up at the very least. Like, you still have to have a destination in mind. What I am looking for when I come into a company is, are they willing to put the resources behind it, right? Are they going to make it mandatory? If they're putting a position in place, more often than not, we create these diversity positions in organizations. We don't empower them to hold people accountable. They get frustrated because they don't have the resources, they don't have the influence, and they don't have the authority. And so you spent money on a salary, but you're going to spend even more on recruiting more people because you're not changing the culture, which means people are going to leave. It makes money to be diverse. It makes more money to be inclusive and to empower those that you have given this, shield, if you will, to kind of guide those inclusive principles, that equity, like making sure that they have executive support. Period. I don't, if you're going to have a diversity position in the organization, they need to be right under your highest leadership. They need to be in your C-suite. They need to be on your board of trustees. They need to be in places because they're the ones that think about the things that you're not thinking about. That's the point in having them at the table, right? Recently, I've sit on board for a nonprofit, and it's about briefly children literacy, right? And they were wanting to give out books and find ways for the students to say they read this many books. And I was like, wait. Now, you're going to penalize parents if you do this way. You're going to overwork teachers if you do this way. But that is what my lens is for. If you're only keeping me here to throw diversity celebrations like Heritage Months, then you're not doing yourself any good. It's like having a Bentley and riding around in your Honda every day. So.
Any additional questions? So I've got one last one as we sort of round out our time together. We've got a number of our chamber is 85% small business, so 20 or fewer employees. So within your clients or within companies that you've seen, can you maybe give us an example of a small business that's been able to put resources, but maybe not dollars, right? I mean, resources come in all shapes and sizes. That's been successful from a small business standpoint.
Community bakery.
Okay.
Community bakery. I love John and Julie.
Yeah.
They
chamber members.
Yes. And so they wanted to have tough conversations, and I always applaud leadership having tough conversations. That doesn't take lots of time. That is when your resources are aligning with your priorities. Now, they also, when they brought us in, we had listening sessions. Like I said, that is what your consultant needs to do first and foremost. Just spend time listening to you and your employees, even before you even begin crafting plans. They paid for those listening sessions. Like if their employees were logged on, it was just like work hours. That is aligning your resources with your priorities and showing your employees that you're prioritizing what they do, that you are valuing their time. You're not asking them to show up for additional training on things that may already be difficult for them, but you're saying, listen, if you show up, I'm going to compensate you. That is how you make a difference.
I love that. So Amber, this has been phenomenal. I'm sure I speak for everyone who's watching right now. There were so many bits
Hi,
within
Mom.
this. There were so many bits within this that I think everybody can sort of pick up and take. So what would be sort of your parting words of wisdom or words of inspiration for our attendees today? And we'll record this so anyone can watch it later. But if someone really felt like they needed to take action, what would you tell them coming out of today?
I'm going to tell them my favorite quotes. Right? My favorite quote is by Loiso, the Holocaust survivor, and he said, "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are in danger, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe." And each and every one of us has center of the universe moments. There's those meetings when or holidays, and Uncle Joe is saying that bigoted or prejudiced or racist thing that he always says, and you simply go, "Uncle Joe, that's not okay," right? Uncle Joe may never stop saying those things, but somebody saw me take my center of the universe moment. And maybe they'll take theirs next time. And then they'll take theirs next time. And every single time somebody takes the center of the universe moment, I get one step closer to not fearing for my 6 foot, 15-year-old Black son when he walks outside.
Amber, thank you so much. And we're going to go ahead and put Amber's contact information up, as well as send it to all of our attendees today. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you if you're interested in continuing this conversation. As I mentioned at the top, the Little Rock Regional Chamber will continue this conversation. This is a great way to start us off, Amber. We may ask you back again
Please do.
for a different conversation, but this is something that we need to keep top of mind, that we need to be talking about. And I hope each one of you heard today something, just a little bit, just something that inspired you or something that made you think a little bit differently. Each of these steps is about forward progress. I saw something yesterday. Don't wait until it's safe to be brave. And if we each took that, man, this thing would be fixed overnight. But it won't take many of us starting to take those steps and being brave today to start to make a real difference in the community and the lives of our heroes.
And if I could just add, a lot of times you have individuals that want to get involved, but they don't know. They don't know where to pick up the fight. They don't know where to advocate or how to be an activist. And then oftentimes there's shame or guilt for not having done so before, right? You cannot help anyone dismantle systems of oppression if your hands are full of guilt. You're gonna have to put it down in order to do the work. So, yes, no one is responsible for the way society is now. We've all been handed this society. So, yes.
But what will we hand?
But we can fix
to the
it.
next,
Exactly.
right?
Let's fix it.
So thank you all for joining us here today. Thanks again to Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield for their support of this, and again for Amber for providing such rich content today. Again, we'll be posting a recording of today's presentation on the Chamber website. We hope many of you will go back and listen. There was a lot of rich content in there, so go back and listen a couple times to make sure that you got all of it. Amber, thank you again.
Follow us on YouTube.
Follow them on YouTube. We wish everyone a great day. Thank you all.
Okay.